Hello and welcome to Home Studies e-learning for Cambridge English Advanced. This is a C1 qualification that shows you have the language skills that employers and universities are looking for. It is a thorough test of all areas of language ability. My name is Natalie and I'm here to prepare you for the speaking component of the exam. Now, as you may know, the advanced speaking exam only takes 15 minutes. That's 1-5. So it's quick. But for many students, it can be the most stressful part of the exam. Candidates don't know what to expect. They don't feel confident in their English, and they just don't know how to prepare. Well, the good news is that you don't have to worry because we're going to take you through all of that. In this course, we'll explain the exam to you so you know what's coming. We'll give you lots of test tips and advice to help you get well prepared. What's more, we'll tell you what the examiner expects from you. So this can help you to understand how to do well in different parts of the exam. And finally, we'll give you plenty of speaking practice with exam-style questions, all of which is designed to improve your speaking performance and so increase your speaking confidence. Right, so as you might suspect, we have a lot of work to do to get you ready for the exam. So shall we get started? Okay, great. I will see you in the first video.
In this video, we'll take a look at speaking part 1. We're going to give you some information, tips and strategies for this part of the exam, and also give you the chance to practice your speaking to help you get ready for the interview stage. Part 1 takes about 2 minutes for 2 candidates. First, the interlocutor asks each of you direct questions, asking for personal information. Then they ask you and your partner questions in turn on general, everyday topics, such as work and study, entertainment, travel, likes and dislikes, daily life and routines, etc. It's important that you only answer your own questions. Don't contribute to your partner's answers, and please don't interrupt them when they are speaking. This part is intended to break the ice, or to try and make you feel comfortable and relaxed in the exam. It also tests your ability to interact with the examiner and to use general social English. So it's not just a warm-up. You are assessed on how well you can answer the examiner's questions.
Let's now take a look at some speaking tips which can help you to improve your speaking performance in part 1. Firstly, when you answer the initial questions, so the warm-up questions at the beginning of the interview, try to keep it simple. So you don't want to say too much at this stage. You only need to give brief answers, and please don't prepare long speeches because the examiner can easily tell if you've memorized your responses, and then you won't get a good mark. When it comes to the questions on general topics, then you do need to say a bit more. You need to develop your answers. So please don't use short one-word or yes-no responses. You need to add details and reasons for your answers. They recommend that you speak for about 2 to 4 sentences per response. So you don't want to say too much because you wouldn't like to dominate the discussion, and also the more you speak, the more mistakes you are likely to make. So do try to find the balance. Now, it's completely natural to feel nervous in a speaking exam, but the examiners are nice and they want you to do well. So try not to be too nervous when you go in there. Think of it as a social situation. So imagine you're meeting a new person for the first time. How would you act? What would you say? Try to bring that kind of behavior into the exam room. And finally, remember this is a C1 exam, so you need to demonstrate your language skills at C1 level. This involves using a wide range of grammar structures and vocabulary, phrasal verbs, idioms, collocations, and things like that. If you keep your answers too simple, you won't get a good mark. So let's now take a look at how you can upgrade your answers. There are a number of different ways that you can make your answers more complex without making them more complicated or difficult to understand. For example, you could use comma which is a nice way of introducing more information. You can use a variety of conditionals, so 0, first, second, or third. You could use idioms as well as collocations or set phrases. Phrasal verbs are a great way, especially of making your speaking sound more natural and conversational. And also adverbs can be used to add emphasis and color in your answers. Okay, so now let's take a look at how some of these techniques can be implemented in answers in the exam. A standard warm-up question in the exam is, where are you from? So the examiner could well ask you this at the beginning of your speaking test. A standard candidate response could be something like, I'm from Warsaw, but I was born in Gdansk. This answer is fine, but what about if we add a comma which in order to add a little bit more information? For example, I'm from Warsaw, but I was born in Gdansk, which is a historic port city in the north of Poland. Another standard warm-up question the examiner could ask you is, how long have you been learning English? Many candidates would reply with, I've been learning English for 12 years. So this answer is technically correct. You've used the right grammar structure and it's clear. However, there's one problem with the answer. Do you know what it is? That's right. We shouldn't exactly repeat or parrot what the examiner has said in the question. So instead of saying, I've been learning English for 12 years, we could add an adverb like actually. I've been studying it for ages, since I was about 8 years old. So you give the same information, you just give it in a more creative and individual way. Continuing on the topic of your English studies, the examiner could ask you a question like, why is learning English useful for you? A candidate could respond with an answer like, I need it for my job, and in general, we need English to succeed in life. Now, this answer is fine, it's accurate, but it's not quite at C1 level. So, how could we upgrade? First of all, we need to get rid of the repetition of need. So instead of saying, I need English for my job, you could say English is a requirement of my job. And notice that the preposition there changes too. A better way of saying in general would be generally speaking. And a lovely phrasal verb that means to succeed is to get ahead. So by changing those 3 language points, we can really upgrade the answer.
A typical question is something like, what do you do in your free time? A candidate could answer, at the weekend, I like to relax. I'd like to go hiking more often, but I don't have much time for it. So this answer is the kind of thing we would expect at B1. However, this is a C1 exam, so let's look at how we could upgrade the answer. So first of all, can you think of any synonyms for relax? That's right, you could say something like unwind, chill out, or use an idiom like recharge my batteries. And this context is the perfect time to show the examiner you can use the second conditional. So for example, you could say, if I had more time, I'd go hiking more often. It's really good if you can spontaneously use a conditional in answering a question in the interview stage. On that topic, you could hear a question like, what do you enjoy doing with your friends? Candidates often say something like, we like to spend time at a coffee shop when we can, or get something to eat in town. So, when we talk about this kind of topic, it's a great opportunity to show the examiner we can use informal English or maybe even some slang. So, to do this, we could change spend time to a phrasal verb like hang out. Or get something to eat could become grab a bite to eat. They have the same meaning, however, they're just more colloquial. As well, instead of saying when we can, you could use an expression like whenever we get the chance. So let's put that together. We like to hang out at a coffee shop whenever we get the chance, or grab a bite to eat in town. And as you can see, that answer really showcases good informal language skills at the right level. When it comes to the topic of travel, a common question is, what kind of holidays do you enjoy the most? So a typical response could be, I'm very interested in traveling, and on holiday I try to get to places that aren't popular with many people. So this is an interesting answer. However, the language is a little bit simple. So once again, let's see how to upgrade it. If you are very interested in something, we can use the adjective avid. So for example, if you're interested in reading, you can say, I'm an avid reader. Or in this case, you could say, I'm an avid traveler. And when we talk about places that are unpopular with many people, a great idiom to use is to be off the beaten track. So that is to go where most people do not. So let's put that together, and we've got I'm an avid traveler, and on holiday I try to get to places that are a bit off the beaten track. This answer is lovely because it's got two really nice idiomatic expressions in it. When it comes to talking about daily routines, you might get a question along the lines of, do you like having a routine in life? The candidate can answer, yes, I do. I work a lot and a routine helps me to make sure I have time for myself and my family as well as my job. Okay, so let's look at how we can improve this answer. Instead of saying you work a lot, you could use the expression you're a bit of a workaholic. So for example, someone who likes to shop a lot is a shopaholic. Someone who likes to eat a lot of chocolate is a chocoholic. And in this case, a workaholic fits the context nicely. As well, when we talk about having time for yourself and your family as well as your job, you're really talking about the right work-life balance. So we put that together, and the answer could be something like, yes, I do. I'm a bit of a workaholic, so a routine helps me to get the right work-life balance. The examiner might well ask you a question about your future plans. A question like this could be, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? The candidate might answer something like, I hope I will find a good job. Maybe I'll have a family and kids. I'm not sure though. Again, this answer is grammatically correct. It's more the kind of thing we'd see at B1, however. So to turn this into a C1 answer, let's have a look how we can upgrade. For example, instead of I hope I will, we can introduce the adverb with hopefully, and then instead of using the future simple, we can use the future perfect. Hopefully, I'll have found. Another word for good is decent, which is obviously a better adjective to use in this context. Instead of saying maybe, we could use might as a modal verb. And instead of saying I'm not sure, we can use the expression who knows. So to put that together, we've got hopefully I'll have found a decent job. I might even have a family and kids by then. Who knows? Which is a very good answer to the question. That brings us to the end of Speaking Part 1. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope it's been useful for you. Before I go, however, I just want to make one final point, and I really hope that it sticks in your mind. Simple questions don't mean simple answers. In the exam, in the interview portion, the examiner can ask you questions that are common to B1 or even A2, but that doesn't mean you can give low-level answers to those questions. Remember, this is a C1 exam, and you need to show the examiner that you've got the speaking skills at that level. So in order to get some more practice, please go to the quiz or download the handout. There is a bunch of additional practice to really get you using the right kind of expressions and idioms and phrasal verbs, basically the kind of language you need to impress the examiner in the interview stage. So good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. In this video, we'll take a look at speaking part 2, or the long term. We're going to give you some information, tips and strategies for this part of the exam, and also to give you the chance to practice your speaking.
Part 2 of the speaking test lasts for about 4 minutes, and that's for 2 candidates. You need to speak on your own for about 1 minute. The examiner shows you 3 photographs, and you choose 2 to speak about. It's important that you only speak about the 2 you choose and don't say anything about the 3rd photo. Your job is to compare the photos and answer the examiner's questions. Listen very carefully to the questions the examiner asks so that you speak specifically about those rather than talking generally about the pictures. You also need to answer a short question about your partner's photographs at the end. So this means you need to listen when they are speaking. This part of the speaking test assesses how well you can speak for 60 seconds without taking a break. The examiners listen to how well you can organize your ideas, as well as the language you use to compare and to describe what you see in the pictures. They also want to hear how well you can express your opinions and speculate or make guesses when you don't know exactly what is going on in the pictures. Let's now take a look at some speaking tips which can help you to do well in this part of the exam. Firstly, focus on the common theme in the photographs. So every set of photographs has something in common. So you need to identify what that is. You then need to compare the photos. So this is to say what is similar and what is different about them. If you aren't sure exactly what the photos show, don't worry about it. This is a good opportunity for you to speculate, or in other words, to guess about what the photos are showing. It's important that you give reasons and explanations for your answers. So don't just say something, say why you think that. It's important that you justify your answers. And do try to speak for the whole minute, okay? You're given 60 seconds, and it's important that you try to fill that time. Don't stop speaking until the examiner says thank you. And finally, listen to your partner, but please don't interrupt them, okay? Let them speak, let them have their chance to do the task, and at the end of their speaking turn, the examiner will ask you a question, when then you can give your opinion. Let's take a look at an example of a speaking task and the examiner's instructions. So these are for candidate A. It's your turn first. Here are your photos. They show people in difficult situations. I would like you to compare two of the pictures and say how the people might be feeling in these situations and how difficult it might be for them to deal with their emotions. Here is your exam task. You've got your 3 pictures and the 2 questions which you need to answer. When choosing your 2 photos, make sure you choose the ones which you could have the most to say about, so the ones that you could most easily speak about. Now it's time to practice your speaking by doing this exam task. So get a stopwatch and time yourself speaking for 60 seconds. Remember to compare the 2 pictures that you have chosen and answer both of the questions that are included in the task. After you finish speaking, listen back to your answer and see how well you did. See how effectively you managed to perform the task. Using the speaking prompts in blue is a very good way of upgrading your answer in this part of the exam. So it could be a good idea to try and memorize some of these speaking prompts and actively try and use them when you do the speaking task. For example, you could say, in this photo, I can see someone in casual pajamas, whereas in that photo, I can see a group of people in formal clothes. I'd say that this is because they're about to do interviews. The lady looks as if she's very upset or possibly depressed about something. Perhaps she's just received some bad news. In both photos, I suppose, they're feeling strong emotions. The woman, sadness or loneliness, and the group of interviewees, possibly nervousness or excitement. Strong emotions like those can, as we know, be very difficult to contain. After you have finished speaking, so after you've spoken for 60 seconds, the examiner will ask the other candidate, your speaking partner, a follow-up question. For example, which of these situations is the most difficult to deal with? Your speaking partner will then have up to 30 seconds to answer the question. Let's now look at another example of an exam speaking task, this time for candidate B. It's your turn now. Here are your photos. They show people working together. I would like you to compare 2 of the photos and say how important it might be for the people to work together in these situations and how difficult it might be for them to do these activities alone. Once again, here is your exam task with the 3 pictures and the 2 questions which you need to answer. As I said before, choose the 2 pictures which you think you could have the most to say about. Now it's time to practice your speaking by doing this exam task. So get a stopwatch and time yourself speaking for 60 seconds. Remember to compare the 2 pictures that you have chosen As I said before, using a wide range of speaking prompts, like the ones in blue, is a very good way of upgrading your answer in this part of the exam. So, as I said, try to memorize them, try to use them actively in the practice tasks so that when it comes to the exam, you feel comfortable with integrating them into your answer. Let's look at some examples based upon the previous pictures. For example, in this photo, there is a group of people in a professional setting, while this photo shows a group of rugby players in a sports setting on a rugby field. Judging by the photo, they're in the middle of a match, which looks quite physical, and they're clearly playing as a team. This person seems to be in charge of the meeting. He could be a manager or perhaps a team leader. His job seems to be to make sure that everyone works well together to achieve the goals or the deadlines that they've set. In both photos, I imagine teamwork is essential for the success of the group and impossible to achieve by just one person alone. Once again, the examiner will ask the other candidate a follow-up question. So if your speaking partner is candidate B, then this question would be for you. Which of these situations require the most teamwork? So why don't you get your recording device again and a stopwatch and time yourself speaking for 30 seconds and answer this question. When you're done, listen back and see how well you performed the task.
So now that we've looked at some examples of exam tasks, it's time to focus on specific exam skills. So these are skills that are important for doing well in the exam, but also skills that can be really useful for life. For example, speculating. As we know, this is the ability to guess about what is going on, what is happening, even though you don't know for sure. So let's look at some examples, common examples of the language for speculating. For example, we've got perhaps or maybe there, and then this would be followed by the present continuous. For example, perhaps they're playing a rugby match, or maybe they're working on a project. So we use the present continuous a lot in this task because we're describing the actions that are happening, the actions that are in progress at that moment in the picture. The same logic applies for they're probably. So they're probably waiting for an interview. Another good expression is it seems like or it seems as if. Both of these are followed by a clause. So, for example, it seems like he's the lead singer in a band, or it seems as if he's the lead singer in a band. These can be used in the same way. We use he appears, so the verb to appear, with the infinitive. So, for example, he appears to be asleep, or he appears to be sleeping in the airport. We could use she might have to refer to the present or to the past. For example, she might have a job interview today. That would be the present simple. Or she might have had a bad day. That's the present perfect. She might have received some bad news, or she might have broken up with her boyfriend. Instead of using might or may, we could also use could. So for example, we could say it could be that he missed his plane. It could be that he is stuck or stranded at the airport. And finally, we can use the expression judging from or judging by the photo. So for example, judging from the photo, they're involved in a very physical rugby match. Or judging by the photo, she's having a really bad day. The next skill that is really important for this part of the speaking test is comparing. Okay, so this is when you compare the similarities as well as the differences between the two photos. You can open with something like, in this photo, I can see, whereas in this photo, someone is. So whereas is a great word we can use for comparing two things. It serves the same function as while. So, for example, he looks quite upset while she seems to be in a good mood. So again, we're comparing their emotions, for example. Another good way of introducing contrast or of comparing is to use the expression on the other hand. So on the other hand, this photo shows a group of people who are playing a sports match. Both is the key word we use when we want to show the similarities. So for example, both pictures depict teamwork. In both photos, I imagine the people are working hard to complete their task. Depict is just a fancy word for show. So instead of repeating show multiple times, you can mix it up and you can instead say, this picture depicts X, Y, or Z. So the takeaway here is that whereas, while, and both are the magic words to be used for comparing in the long term.
So that brings us to the end of the video for speaking part 2. Thank you for watching. I hope it's been useful for you. Before I go, I would just like to leave you with one final thought. And as I always say to my students, I'll say to you now, don't talk to the photos, talk about them. So I understand that if you are nervous, it might be easier just to look down at the photos for the full 60 seconds. However, this is not a very engaging way of speaking or performing the task. So it's important that you still try to make eye contact with the examiner and your speaking partner. Try to engage them, okay, in a natural, friendly way. Try to bring them into the conversation rather than just talking to your paper for the minute. Okay, and I hope that by doing this course and by doing the additional practice activities, that it would make you feel more confident and more ready to take on the task in a positive, engaging way. All right, so good luck with the practice activities, and I will see you in the next video.
Hello and welcome to Home Studies e-learning for Advanced. Thanks for joining us. In this video, we'll take a look at speaking part 3, or the collaborative task, in which you and your partner work as a team. We're going to give you some information, tips and strategies for this part of the exam, and also give you the chance to practice your speaking. Part 3 is divided into 2 parts and takes about 4 minutes for 2 candidates. The interlocutor gives you and your partner instructions and a mind map with a set of written prompts. First, you discuss the task with your partner for about 2 minutes, and then there's another question you talk about for about 1 minute. Focus on interacting with your partner, as the examiner doesn't take part in the discussion. Here is an example of an exam task. So you see the mind map, and in the middle there is the question. So this is the question that you are to discuss with your speaking partner. In addition to the question, there are 5 written prompts. So these are there to help you and to give you ideas upon which to base your discussion. You don't need to use all of the prompts, but they are there in case you would like to. It's important to listen to the task carefully so you understand exactly what you need to do. You also have 15 seconds to think about the task before you start speaking. You should start talking on your own and not wait for the examiner, for the interlocutor, to ask you to begin. After 2 minutes, they will ask you to make a decision together on the topic you have been discussing. You have a minute for this part of the task. In general, this part assesses how fluently you can speak and how well you can participate in a discussion. Specifically, it tests your ability to do the following. Firstly, exchange ideas. So that is to say what you think about a topic and then listen and react to what your partner thinks about it. Secondly, to express and justify your opinions. So that is to give your opinion, but also to give reasons for why you have that opinion. Next, you need to agree and/or disagree. Candidates often think it's better just to agree with your partner to be polite. However, in this part of the exam, it can be good to disagree because disagreement leads to discussion, and that is the most important part of this task. Then you need to speculate. So as we know from the previous video, to speculate is to guess what you think might be the reason for something, even though you're not 100% sure. And finally, you need to negotiate and reach a decision with your speaking partner about the question that has been asked by the examiner. Remember, it isn't necessary to reach a decision, but you should discuss options and give reasons and at least try to disagree. It is okay if by the end of the task, you and your partner agree to disagree.
Let's now take a look at some speaking tips which can help you to improve your performance in this part of the speaking exam. So firstly, focus on depth and detail. So there's no need to rush through and discuss all of the 5 prompts, okay? You don't need to talk about all of the prompts. It's better to talk about 2 or 3 of them in detail to develop the topic, to show that you've got a depth of language ability rather than quickly going through all of the points. It's great if you can find links and connections between the points, okay? So you can clearly articulate what different prompts have in common. One of the key aspects of this part of the exam is your ability to engage your speaking partner. So this is not a monologue, this is about how you can communicate with your speaking partner. And so the best way to do this is just to remember the simple GJG. All right, so this is to give your opinion, to justify your opinion, and then get an opinion from your partner. Okay, so GJG, give an opinion, justify an opinion, and get an opinion from your partner. And this way you can balance your talking time. Remember, it's a C1 exam, so you need to show that you have a range of language, both vocabulary and grammar, which you can use naturally and appropriately in the discussion. In the final part of the task, when the examiner asks you the final question, it's not good to make your decision too quickly. All right, you have a full minute to discuss, so it's about negotiating. So you give your opinion, and then your speaking partner can either agree or disagree with you, and you can go back and forth until you come to some agreement. And finally, you're fine to interrupt if your partner is talking too much. Okay, if they try to dominate the discussion by talking for the entire time, then you need to find a polite way of making sure that you also have your say. Let's read through the examiner's instruction for the exam task together. Now I'd like you to talk about something together for about 2 minutes. Here are some ways that people make extra money, and a question for you to discuss. First, you have some time to look at the task. Now talk to each other about what options one might consider when looking to increase his or her income.
So as we said before, there is the mind map that is given to you with the question in the center and then a number of helpful written prompts around it. Take 15 seconds to read the task. So here are some examples of how you might comment on the prompts using appropriate language. For example, to give an opinion, you can say, I think or I feel that asking for a raise is a good place to start. And then you follow that with the question, do you agree? Okay, so here you give your opinion and then you ask for your partner's opinion in return. If you would like to agree with what your partner is saying, you can say something like, I totally agree with you about cutting down on expenses. But if you would like to disagree with what your partner is saying, you could use an expression like, I see what you're saying, but selling unwanted things is unlikely to make much money. Then, as we said, it's good to establish a connection. So for example, you could say, well, I think getting a second job and working extra hours are similar. They're both connected to increasing your workload to make more money. And then we want to engage our partner as much as we can. So we would like to ask for their opinion on a different prompt if we would like to move on to another one. So instead of just giving our opinion first, we could say to them, so how about investing in assets? This is another way of saying, what do you think about the idea of investing in assets?
Now let's read the examiner's instruction for the second part of the task. Now you have a minute to decide which option would be most suitable for a student and why.
To do the second part of the task, you look at the same mind map as before, and you consider the 5 prompts which you discussed previously, and decide in this case which one would be the best option for a student. You can open the discussion by giving your opinion. For example, I'd say that cutting down on expenses and sticking to a tight budget would be the best idea for a student. How do you feel about that? So just like in the first part of the task, here as well, first you give your opinion, and then you try to get an opinion from your partner. When they offer their opinion, you can agree with what they say. For example, you could use an expression like, I couldn't agree with you more. They could download an app and try selling their used clothes, books, or electronics for some extra cash. As in this example, you shouldn't simply just agree with your partner, you should also offer some additional information, an additional reason or example to illustrate why you agree with their opinion. Or if you would like to disagree, you could use an expression like, I'm not convinced that investing in assets would be an option for most students. And as we said before, this could lead to further discussion. Once you think you and your partner have reached some kind of agreement, then you can open with the question, so do we agree on that?
In order to do well in Speaking Part 3, it's very important that you show a wide variety of speaking skills. So this is not a monologue, this is not just you talking, this is you trying to engage your speaking partner in a number of different ways. So to practice this, let's start by looking at the prompts on the right and brainstorming as many expressions for each one as you can. It might be helpful to imagine that you are in the exam and you are speaking with your partner. So, what do you say? How do you deliver on the following? So, number 1, start the discussion. Number 2, ask your speaking partner for their opinion. Number 3, agree with their opinion. Number 4, disagree with their opinion. Number 5, interrupt them politely if they're talking too much. Number 6, keep the conversation going if there is dead air. And number 7, reach an agreement on the topic that is being discussed. Okay, so pause the video, brainstorm as many expressions as you can for each of the prompts, and press play when you're ready to continue.
So now that we've taken a look at the exam task, let's take an in-depth look at the exam skills. So by that, I mean the language that we can use for the different skills that are required in the exam. The first one is starting a discussion. So to do so, we can use a few set expressions like, shall I start? Or if you'd like to be a bit more colloquial, you can say, shall I get the ball rolling? You could also ask a polite question, do you mind if I go first? Or you could change it using would to say, would you mind if I went first? Any of these would work as a means of opening the discussion. Now let's move on to asking opinions. This is a really important skill for the exam because you are assessed on your communicative ability, so your ability to interact with your speaking partner. So to ask someone's opinion, we can use a variety of expressions like, what do you think about that? Or do you agree with me? Do you know what I mean? Or how do you feel about that? You could also ask, what are your thoughts on this? What's your view on that? Or to be more colloquial, what's your take on that? And a really nice one to use if you want to sound more native is, what do you reckon? So this is a common verb in British English, which means, what do you think? Or what is your opinion? Okay, and when you're trying to use these questions in the practice activities and in the exam, focus on the prepositions. It's really important that you get those right so that the questions you ask sound natural and they come across well. As we said before, in the exam, you can agree with what your partner says, with their opinions. So here are some fixed expressions like, I completely agree. You could also say, I totally or I absolutely agree. For emphasis, you could say, I couldn't agree with you more. That's a good point. Or I'm with you on that one. Another nice expression is, I tend to agree with you. Or to speak enthusiastically, you can say, I see exactly what you mean. If, however, you would like to disagree, there are also some fixed expressions that you can use. We usually start with an acknowledgement, followed by a but or however. So, for example, I see what you're saying, but. I take your point, but. I see what you mean, however. So this is a way of politely disagreeing rather than just being too direct in your disagreement. You can also use the expression, I'm not convinced. And finally, if you and your partner just can't get on the same page, if you don't have the same opinion on something, it's nice to sum that up by saying, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree. And that's perfectly fine as well. Now, if your partner talks a lot, and if they are turning the discussion into a monologue, you might need to politely but firmly interrupt in order to make sure that you get your speaking time in the exam. So, in order to do this, you can memorize and use some of these fixed expressions. For example, can I add something here? Or is it okay if I jump in here for a second? You can also say, if I might add something, or sorry to interrupt, but. So this is really all you need, just a little expression to make a note of the fact that you feel like you're not being heard, and then to add your own opinion afterwards. And as we've said, it's really important that throughout the discussion, you keep talking. So if, for example, there is nothing to say or there's a pause in conversation, it's good that you quickly react and say something like, well, let's move on to, and then you can make the suggestion, or shall we go on to the next one? Or, so what about this one? Or how about that one? So a quick prompt to ask your partner a question, which will kickstart the conversation and avoid any awkward silences. And finally, you need to reach agreement. So once you've discussed the task or the question with your partner and you've both given your opinions, you can suggest some kind of agreement. So you can use expressions like, shall we go with? Or, so do we agree on that? A nice colloquial one is, are we on the same page? So that means, do we have the same opinion? So are we on the same page? Or to simply show your agreement, you can say, yeah, I would go with that.
And that brings us to the end of Speaking Part 3. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it's been helpful and that you've learned something. So as always, I have a top tip for you to wrap things up. And for Speaking Part 3, my takeaway is that you need to avoid dead air. So dead air is that situation in a conversation where no one is saying anything. There is complete silence. And dead air is pretty much the worst thing that can happen in the speaking test. So it's your job as an interlocutor to keep the conversation going for the full 4 minutes. So you can either, if there is that lull in conversation, you can give an opinion. You can revisit a point that was previously discussed. You could ask your partner for their opinion on something. It doesn't matter really how you fill the silence. It's just important that you try. All right, so that's all for me. Good luck with the practice task. I hope it helps to consolidate what we've done in this video, and I will see you in the next one.
In this video, we'll take a look at Speaking Part 4, which is a discussion between you, your partner, and the examiner. We're going to give you some information, tips, and strategies for this part of the exam, and also give you a chance to practice your speaking. Part 4 takes about 5 minutes for 2 candidates. The interlocutor asks you questions to lead a general discussion that develops the topic of Part 3. They may ask questions for both of you to discuss, or they may ask you questions in turn. If a question is for you, the examiner says your name. If it's a question to discuss, the examiner indicates it with a gesture. The examiner asks the questions, but then you need to interact with your partner for the majority of the discussion. This part of the test assesses your ability to do 3 key things. Number 1, to express and justify your opinions. So that is to give your opinion and also to give reasons, details, or examples to support it. Number 2, to agree and or disagree. It's important that you pay attention to what your partner says and to say clearly if you agree or disagree with them. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers to the questions, just proof of your language ability and how well you can communicate with your speaking partner. And number 3, react to ideas and opinions. So it's also important for you to react to what your partner says, just like you would in a real-life conversation.
Let's now go over some speaking tips which can help you to do well in this part of the exam. So firstly, develop full, detailed answers to the questions. So in this part of the exam, you really need to show your language ability, and you can't do that if you give very short answers. So think about giving reasons for your opinions. Think about giving examples. Think about relating the question to your own life. So just try to say more to show a wide range of language skills. Secondly, it's important to listen very carefully to what the examiner says. Unlike in the previous parts, there are no written prompts. You don't get to see the questions. You will only get to hear the examiner asking them. So in the exam, you can ask the examiner to repeat. However, you can't ask the examiner to explain or define anything in the questions. You have to work that out for yourself. Next is a very important point because it's one of the most common mistakes that candidates make in this part of the speaking test. And that is they tend to interact with the examiner more than their speaking partner. Now, the examiner will ask you the question, but then it's a discussion with your partner. So you need to make eye contact with your partner. You need to engage your partner in the discussion rather than the examiner. So talk to your partner. Ask them for their opinion. Engage them in the discussion as much as possible, and don't really pay that much attention to the examiner. They will be listening to what you say and grading your responses. Next, try to stay relevant to the topic. So the examiner will ask you specific questions, and you need to try and respond to those questions. Of course, you have to develop the topic, but you have to develop it in a way that is connected to the question. So in other words, don't ramble. So to ramble is to kind of talk in a confused way about something without really getting to the point and just talking about things that are not suitable or not relevant to the question. So take care not to ramble and stick to the topic at hand. And finally, you might need to use delaying tactics in the exam in order to buy time. Okay, so what do I mean by delaying tactics? In the exam, they might ask you a question that is quite difficult to answer or something that you haven't thought of before. So you need a moment to just organize your thoughts. So instead of saying nothing and having dead air, it's better to use some delaying tactic. For example, say something like, "Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't thought of it before." Or, well, let me think. So you just use little fillers in order to buy time, in order to formulate your opinion and how you would like to answer the question.
So as we said before, there is the mind map that is given to you with the question in the center and then a number of helpful written prompts around it. Take 15 seconds to read the task. Here is a short sample of the kind of questions the examiner might ask you based upon the task in part 3. You could hear questions like, do people overestimate the importance of holidays? What are the advantages of going abroad on holiday? Are there any places where you think it is inappropriate to build theme parks and specially designed holiday resorts? Now it's time to do some structured speaking practice to help you prepare for Part 4. Listen to the exam style questions and then give your answers. In each case, you will have up to 20 seconds to reply. In the real exam, you might well speak for longer than that, depending on how much you have to say. However, this is a controlled speaking practice activity, so we will set a time limit of 20 seconds for each answer. After you have finished answering, look at a sample answer to see how yours could be improved. The target language for giving opinions, justifying opinions, and getting opinions from your partner is highlighted in blue. What type of jobs should be most highly valued and paid? Now take 10 seconds to read through a sample answer of an exam candidate. As you can see, the candidate introduces their opinion using the expression, "well, as I see it." After that, they give reasons for their opinion and then include their speaking partner with the expression, "don't you agree?" What part does the media play in people's expectations of life nowadays? Let's look at another sample response. Take 10 seconds to read the answer. Again, the candidate starts by giving their opinion using the expression, "from my point of view." And at the end of the answer, asks the question, "do you ever feel that way?" as a means of introducing their speaking partner into the discussion. How important is it to follow fashion trends? Once again, please take 10 seconds to read the candidate's response. Here again, they open with an opinion. "I tend to think." Then they offer an example using the expression "for instance." And at the end, they try to elicit their partner's opinion by using the question, "do you know what I mean?" Some people say it's only possible to be happy if you have a lot of money. What's your opinion? Same story. Please read the candidate's response. In this answer, the candidate is using a filler, which suggests that the question is difficult or they're just not quite sure what to say straight away. So they use an expression to buy time. Oh, that's an interesting question. Once again, they offer an example, this time using like. And as we've seen before, the partner is included in the discussion by receiving the follow-up question, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that people have the right priorities nowadays? Why or why not? Please take another 10 seconds to read the candidate's answer. As you can see, the beginning of this answer is quite similar to the previous one in that in both cases they use a filler. Once again, the candidate is trying to buy time or delay answering the question. So they say, well now, let me see, I feel. So they're just giving themselves a little bit more time to think of what they'd like to say. They'd also like to highlight why they have a particular opinion, and so they use the expression for this reason. Once again at the end, they ask their partner for their opinion, using the question, what's your take on it? This is the final example. Please take some time to read through the candidate's response. They start by introducing their opinion, using the expression, I'd argue that. They then introduce a contrasting opinion using the word whereas. Whereas is a synonym of while. So in your answer, you can use whereas or while to show a different point of view or two differing sides of the same argument. They then close the answer with the question, what do you reckon? And that is a very British way of asking someone's opinion. So it might be a good one to memorize to make a good impression on the examiner. Now that we've looked at some sample answers with target language highlighted in blue, it's time to focus on the exam skills that you will need to do well in this part of the exam. The first important skill is giving your opinion. So let's look at some ways that you can say what you think in English. You could say, well, in my opinion, or I think, I feel. You could say from my point of view or from my perspective. Or how about saying I tend to think or I tend to believe? You could also say something like I would argue that. All of these are solid ways of introducing your opinion in a speaking task. Another important exam skill is giving reasons and examples. So remember, we don't just give our opinion, but we also say why we have that opinion. Here are some fixed expressions to help you give reasons for your thinking. You could say, one reason why, or for this reason. You could give examples simply by saying, for example, or for instance. Listen to that one more time. For instance, it's a more sophisticated way of saying, for example. You can also use like or such as to give examples for your thinking. As you know, part 4 is an interactive task, which means you need to be able to include your partner in the discussion. In order to develop this skill, you can try to memorize some of the following expressions. For example, you can give your opinion and then say, "Don't you agree?" If you aren't really sure about a topic, you can give a vague opinion and then pass it on to your partner with, "Perhaps you know more about it." You could also elicit agreement or disagreement by saying, "Wouldn't you say so?" If you'd like to ask them a general question to bring them into the discussion, you could ask a question like, "What are your thoughts on all of this?" Or "How do you feel about that?" Or "Where do you stand on?" and then the particular question that you're discussing. In part 4, you might need to delay giving your answer. So that is, you need to buy time because you aren't really sure what you would like to say and you need a second or two to think. If you find yourself in this situation, then using a filler can be a really helpful strategy. Some examples of fillers include, "Well now, let me see, or "Let me think, or "Oh, what a good question." And there you could substitute any adjective that is appropriate to the context. You could even say something like, "I've never really thought about that before." And then continue with your answer. So that is speaking part 4 in a nutshell. Before I go, I'd just like to leave you with one final thought. As you prepare for the exam, it's not just about practicing your English, it's also about getting informed. So read the news, listen to podcasts, explore blogs, all in English, and try to expose yourself to as many opinions as possible. This can help you to build up a wide vocabulary in different areas like health, the environment, education, technology, relationships, or money, all of which can come up in the exam. And while you're reading, think about how you would express these opinions in your own words. And of course, think about how you could express them at C1 level. Okay, so thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it's been useful. Remember to go and do the practice quizzes and the handouts for additional speaking practice. Good luck. I hope you enjoy them.
Well, that brings us to the end of the speaking module. I hope you have enjoyed it and that you have learned a lot. Please don't forget to do all of the practice activities and the quizzes for each part to consolidate everything that we have covered in these videos. And remember that speaking, just like playing a sport or playing a musical instrument, just takes practice. Like they say, practice makes perfect. So your self-study shouldn't end with the end of this module. If you can, try to find a study partner, so a friend who is at or around your level, or maybe even someone who is preparing for the same exam as you. You can do live speaking practice together, for example on Zoom, where you can go through the practice tests together. You can take turns being the examiner and in the roles of student A and student B. Use a digital device to record your speaking. Then you can listen back and give each other some constructive feedback. If you don't have a study partner, Don't worry, all practice is good practice. You can ask yourself the examiner's questions and set yourself a time limit for the task, just like we did during the course. Again, record your speaking, and when you listen back, think about how you were able to perform the task. Ask yourself, what did I do well, and what could I improve? And finally, if you would like to have a live practice exam session with me or one of our experienced Cambridge exam trainers, then please contact Home Studies for more information. Well, in case I don't see you again, good luck for the speaking exam. I hope it goes really well on exam day.